Leading to dramatic change in European history. Martin Luther took a stand against the Roman Catholic Church by nailing his 95 Theses, despite threats upon his life and the overall rejection of his teachings. His goal to expose the Church helped inspire a necessary reform that brought forth new ideas and beliefs. His determination to get his ideas heard eventually led to a legacy that still exists today in Lutheranism.
Well, obviously, one of Luther's big impacts is that he initiated a process that led to a split in the church, the religion, the Christianity of Western and Central Europe.
Martin Luther was born on November 10th, 1483 in Eiselberg, Saxony. His parents wanted him to become a lawyer, so in 1501, Martin Luther enrolled in the University of Erfurt, and it seemed like law would be his profession. However, Martin Luther encountered a life-changing experience that started his road to becoming a revolutionary thinker. On July 1505, Luther got caught in a life-threatening thunderstorm and vowed that he would become a monk if he lived. The storm eventually subsided and he survived. Luther felt obligated to keep his promise, so on July 17, 1505, Martin Luther joined the Augustinian Priory in Erfurt. He found life at the monastery to be difficult and was confused and discouraged by the immorality and corruption of Catholic priests there. In an attempt to end his spiritual confusion, Luther enrolled in the University of Wittenberg, where he successfully received a doctorate and became a professor of theology. While preparing a lecture about Romans, he read, "The just will live by faith." Romans chapter 1, verse 17. He dwelled on this statement for some time. Finally, he understood that the key to spiritual salvation was not to fear God or be forced to believe something, but to believe that faith alone would bring salvation. This realization began to separate Luther from the Catholic Church. At that time, the Catholic Church had a strong grip over Western Europe. Everybody was taught to follow the Catholic Church in order to avoid hell and enter heaven. The Church was extremely wealthy because people always paid a tithe, or 10% of their yearly earnings. They were told that failure to pay this would lead to an instant passage to hell. People also gave money to the Church to buy indulgences. Indulgences are basically remissions for the punishments of sins. This is specifically the reducing of time in purgatory, or the time you spend before you enter heaven. Thus, people began to care less about their sins, for they could just buy their way back into heaven. These indulgences further enraged Luther after a friar named John Tetzel came to Germany to sell these indulgences, and these actions prompted Luther to post his 95 Theses, known as the Disputation on the Power of Indulgences. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther angrily nailed his 95 Theses onto the door of a church in Wittenberg, Germany, after Pope Leo X began a new sale of indulgences to fund the building of a new church called St. Peter's Basilica. Luther's 95 Theses are based around the central idea that indulgences are incorrect and that only God could forgive sins. Luther continued to argue that indulgences shouldn't be sold to build St. Peter's Basilica. He felt that instead of taking money from the poor, the Pope, who was one of the richest people in Europe, should pay at least in part for the basilica. Luther also pointed out that the Pope had no power over purgatory and that the only punishments that he could forgive are the ones that he gave out himself. Luther stood by his beliefs that God gives justice and grace through faith alone. He also believed that priests were not needed to act as middlemen for people and God, and that the Pope didn't have the authority to guide the life of a Christian. Luther stressed that the Bible is the central religious authority, not the priests.
This kind of notion of looking only to the sacred text, right, the Bible, as a kind of the sole source for understanding about God and the relationship of the believer to God, because of the way that emphasizes both the importance of reading, the importance of being able to understand the written word, and also the responsibility and the freedom of each individual to engage in that reading and to develop, but for Luther, of course, in theological terms, is a relationship with God. Right?
Luther did not intend for his theses to be an outright rejection of the Church, but instead he wanted the Church to realize its faults and change based on what he thought was the right way to worship God. This shows that Luther's main objective was not to overthrow the Church, but to make the Church spiritually correct in God's eyes. Also, the posting of Luther's 95 Theses marked the beginning of a revolutionary movement, the Reformation. Under the Reformation, a new form of Christian faith emerged called Protestantism. Protestants shared Luther's beliefs that the Church was wrong, separating themselves from the Roman Catholic Church, and eventually they became different branches of Christianity. Luther's bold denunciations and translation made people reconsider what the Roman Catholic Church has been doing. Overall, this revolutionary movement caused a religious, political, and intellectual upheaval. The Reformation was thus in a sense necessary because there was a need for change over corrupt church practices. What the Church was doing was not in accordance with the Bible, and that eventually needed to change, and Luther intended to be the one to change it.
It looks pretty clear that Luther did also want to really cause a stir, right? He really wanted to present a challenge to the ecclesiastical hierarchy. He didn't simply want to engage in a debate, but really to initiate a kind of more radical movement.
In his efforts to reform the Roman Catholic Church, Martin Luther faced many challenges. Once Luther's 95 Theses reached Rome, Pope Leo was put in dismay. He first responded by ordering a ban of silence on monks. After a year of unproductive negotiations, the Pope issued the Exsurge Domini in 1520, a papal bull that directly attacked Luther, ordering the withdrawal of theological errors the Church found in his writings. Luther continued to defy the Church by publicly burning his copy of the papal bull, along with some volumes of the Church's canon law. On January 1521, Pope Leo excommunicated Luther. Instead of being discouraged after being kicked from the Church, Luther continued to spread his ideas to expose the corruption of the Church. The matter was then turned over to secular authorities, and Luther was ordered to appear before the Diet of Worms, a general assembly of the Holy Roman Empire conducted by Emperor Charles V. There, Martin Luther was asked whether or not he supported his writings. Despite threats of arrest, death, and much more, Luther made a stand and claimed that he will not reject his writings unless somebody proves it's wrong through Scripture. Eventually, the Edict of Worms passed, proclaiming Luther a heretic. Despite these challenges that threatened him with arrest and his life, Luther moved forward to get his message through. He strongly believed in his cause and ended up saying that he didn't make a big contribution to this reform. However, he was the one who pushed the need to reform farther than any other figure, drastically changing the Roman Catholic Church by exposing its wrongdoings.
In Europe, during the Middle Ages, there have been earlier critiques of like the corruption of priests, of even some critiques of popes, right? For popes for not living up to the standards expected of religious leaders. But what Martin Luther argued and was able to kind of successfully build a movement around was a complete rejection of the idea of a priesthood and the structure of the Catholic Church, right, under the authority of the Pope.
Martin Luther then took refuge in Wittenberg and began his translation of the New Testament in German as the Reformation strengthened. The translation was one of his greatest accomplishments because it gave ordinary people a chance to read and interpret the Bible for themselves. It fixed the problem of only priests being able to interpret the Bible. Then, Martin Luther went to Wittenberg Castle Church in Eisenach in May 1522 and began organizing a new church, Lutheranism. Today, Lutheranism is one of the largest Protestant Christian denominations. The Reformation was a significant period of time where people started to question the beliefs that the Roman Catholic Church had made them accept. Luther's calls to reform ended up creating an idea that people can question their current authority, whether it be secular or religious. Throughout Luther's journey, he never stopped standing by his beliefs through orders and threats from high authority figures. Luther's actions still resonate today as more than 36% of Christians are Protestant. Also, the Reformation paved the way for the scientific revolution. All scientific investigation and endeavor prior to Luther had been controlled by the Church. In terms of science, it is generally granted by modern historians that there never would have been modern science were it not for the Reformation. Not only that, the Reformation has profoundly affected the modern view of politics and law. Prior to the Reformation, the Church governed politics, controlled kings, and governed the law of the land. In a wider view, America was greatly impacted by Luther because the pilgrims that settled here were of Protestant denomination. They came here to continue their practice of Protestantism freely. Therefore, without Luther's help in building Protestantism, the pilgrims may have never been influenced to settle in America and the U.S. may have not been formed. Martin Luther was a revolutionary thinker who changed European history by bringing forth the split of the Roman Catholic Church. His goal to please God fueled him to take a stand for what he believed were God's true wishes.